Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Are we ready for spooky season? I certainly am, and over the next week or so, I am going to share with you several videos featuring my spooky season decks. So we're gonna start this off with a look at what's in my spooky season basket. So this is my spooky season basket. Can't see it all because it won't all fit on camera. So these are all decks that I work with not only in October for the spooky season, but also decks that I work with usually for the latter half of the year, as well as sometimes just decks that I get into for various random reasons and themes and energies. But to start things off, we're just gonna take a look at my spooky season tarot and what I keep in that basket. So these are in no particular order, and I'm just gonna grab at random from my basket. So we're gonna start with Tarot of Haunted House. I always wanna say of a haunted house, but according to the guidebook, it's just of haunted house. So this is a fantastic spooky season deck. Here's the backs. I have edged my copy. I will try to point out whenever I've done a modification to the deck. I'll be honest, okay, was on the fence about this deck when I first saw it start making its way around the tarot community. I really thought that it was gonna have cheese factor, if I'm being totally honest. Because it's like a haunted house and it's like a, I don't know, it on first glance was like, ooh, B-horror movie, but I absolutely love this deck. I think that the interpretations of the tarot are amazing. I love that we follow this one central figure. I believe her name is Raven throughout the deck. And so it creates like a story, like a haunted house story or like a little movie. And I really do love that energy. I think that the interpretations of each of the tarot cards is actually really, really smart in this deck. And I'll be honest, it completely surprised me. I got it to be kind of like just a novelty thing. It might have been actually in, maybe it was last year or the year before, I did a theme, an October theme for monthly medicine, as I normally do. As we're doing this month, we're doing ghost stories. But every October we do sort of a thematic practice, and there was one year where the theme actually was, I think, haunted house, or haunted houses played very predominantly in the theme that I created. And so I purchased this deck specifically for that practice, but I've really kind of grown to love this deck. It's an excellent reader. I love the interpretations. I think I already said that, but that's okay. We can say it again. I think it's really smart. It's really smartly done, and it is like the haunted house without being overly cheesy, which is really what I was thinking it was gonna be when I first got it. And really anytime I saw it, just, running around TarotTube. But there's a lot of depth here, and I really appreciate that about this deck, because this is one of those decks that on surface level, you're just like, oh yeah, it's a tarot, a thematic tarot around a haunted house. Cool. Gives me kind of B-horror movie vibes. But when you actually get into the artwork and you dive deep into the details and you get into the little white book, which is actually quite wonderful. I think it's written by Shasta Graham. And when you get into all of that and you add all of those layers into your work with this deck, you realize that this deck actually has quite a profound depth to it, which I don't think we really see when we're just surface level reading. Because we follow the central character, I think it's fairly easy to just kind of in a sense, remove her and then imagine yourself there. That's kind of how I approach it. And kind of imagine myself in this world, in this haunted house, stepping into these scenarios, and then how I would react to it. This is the one card in the deck that I actually don't like. I don't know, for whatever reason, it just completely misses the mark for me. It's totally outside of the scope and theme of the deck, so I feel like this one is just a bit of a miss. But it's really the only card in the deck that I'm like, I really don't like that card. And to have just one card that I'm like, I really don't like that card, is, that's pretty good. So anyway, I love this deck. I think it reads amazing. We've about flipped through the whole thing, so I guess we'll just keep on going. I will try not to maybe dwell so long on each deck, but we shall see, because I do actually really love my spooky season decks. So the next deck in my spooky season basket is my Dark Angels Tarot. Here's the backs. Again, I have edged mine. I have modified most of these decks. This deck, for me, it's useful for me and it exists in my practice beyond spooky season, but I think it does fit really well into this energy of spooky season. But this for me is totally like 90s goth girl tarot. It really reflects the kind of place that I was in my life in the 90s, the kind of aesthetic I was drawn to. This whole idea of like dark angels was very much a thing I was into at that time. A little bit vampires too. We'll get to that because I do have a vampire deck in here. But this was actually where I was more in that time period. This was more of sort of the fantasy world that I was living in. It was the kind of fiction that I was reading, the kind of TV shows and movies that I was watching. This was also about the time that I started to get into witchcraft and started, learning about Wicca. And this deck to me has a little bit of a witchy feel to it, and probably because of that, because it's all tied together for me into that particular time frame. As far as being a reader, I think it's actually a really solid reader. I use it a lot for sort of that inner teenager work. I've used it a lot for readings for my youngest. I've also used it a lot for my writing work because this theme fits into some of the fiction that I've played with. The artwork is pretty haunting and quite beautiful, I think, but sometimes it's a bit odd. So like, it's one of those decks where like, sometimes I don't quite know what it is I'm seeing in the card. And there's a little bit of, I think, shadow in that ambiguity where it's like, I can't quite make out what's going on. And so that encourages me to look at that a little bit deeper. But overall, I think it's beautiful. Like, it's kind of, it reminds me of kind of like really early digital artwork, digital collage work. I wouldn't say so much digital collage because it doesn't really have that collage feel. It looks kind of like art that's been painted digitally. So that's kind of what I mean by that vibe. And it reminds me again of like that time when we were just starting to get into that sort of work, really starting to explore digital art as a medium. And so it just for all of those reasons takes me back to that time. And I really do think it's a really cool reader. It's definitely probably not for everyone. It's a deck that I do use year round, but I think it does fit really well into this spooky season vibe. It also has, all the kind of angels and crows and kind of that dark shadowy energy. But I feel like some of these characters, I feel like I've seen elsewhere. Like maybe the photographs were used elsewhere. I'm trying to think back. Maybe it might have been in my like really early design days. But yeah, some of them just feel really familiar, and maybe it's just because like I've seen this deck around for many years before I actually purchased it, so that could be as well. But I think it's really cool. Like it has a definite dark angel vibe to it, but there's like a little bit of a nod to that vampire energy too. Speaking of vampires, this is the Tarot of the Vampyres, right? I think that's the name of this deck. Here's the backs. I have edged mine in red, which is still bleeding on my hands quite a bit. This deck, like, I'll be honest, I bought for the guidebook. I do think the artwork is quite beautiful, and it really reminds me of that sort of 90s, maybe early 2000s vampire aesthetic. So it's like a little bit more adult, whereas I feel like the Dark Angels is actually more in that sort of inner teenager era for me. This deck feels like it sits more like in the, I don't know, like your early 20s, your early adulthood, right? You're just kind of trying to find who you are at that point. And this deck does tap into that vampire energy really well. It reminds me of like the vampires, like pre-Twilight vampires, right? Like Interview with a Vampire, like Lestat and Louis and all of them. I feel like it sits more in that world. It definitely reminds me of art that was very popular in the 90s, and early 2000s, I do believe, although like I'm not entirely sure what was popular at that time, because I was always into doing my own thing. I do think the cards are really, really beautiful, but I'll be honest, like this deck it's been really hit or miss on my readings with it. I did buy it for the guidebook because the guidebook is amazing and I just wanted to read it. But as far as working with it, I know a lot of people love this deck and it's like the favorite for a ton of tarot people in the community. And I know lots of people have done really deep dives with it and lots of wonderful work with it. But I have just really not found my way with this deck. It's one that I will always hang on to probably because it definitely has a nostalgia value to it in terms of like being that, you know, like early 20s where like I don't know, vampires were like all the thing, right? I'm thinking like back to like Interview with the Vampire era, like pre-Twilight is really where I'm at, right? This is definitely pre-Twilight world. And it definitely reminds me of that era, and it reminds me of that sort of little like brief fling with sort of the vampire thing where everybody like wanted to be a vampire, right? The Dark Angels actually fits more into kind of my particular aesthetic and my particular personal association if we're looking at decks that like just kind of feature that like I have for like nostalgia reasons or take me back to a certain time and place. The Dark Angels is really more of that deck for me. This reminds me of like stuff that I would see like hanging on the walls in like, I don't know, Hot Topic or Spencer's or whatever, but it's not really one that I really jive with very well. My readings have been really hit or miss with it. Sometimes they're like, I'll get a real profound message, but oftentimes it kind of falls flat and it just leaves me kind of wanting. And again, that's a very me thing, right? It's nothing against this deck. It's just where I'm at or maybe my work with it. I haven't found its place in my collection. It's one that I'll probably hang on to because the guidebook is amazing and that is why I bought the deck. But you know, I will probably always hang on to it because it does have a bit of that nostalgia energy for me. And it is a beautiful deck. I just haven't really found my place with it yet. Okay, so moving on to a deck that I have 100% found my way with. This is my Zombie Tarot, which is maybe one of, if not my favorite spooky season deck. I have edged mine in this like light brown color. I adore everything about this deck. It is, it's probably up there in my top decks in just a general sense, but it's definitely up there for my top spooky season deck. It might be like my favorite spooky season deck, although like there's four decks I think that I would classify as like absolute favorites to use this time of year. This, however, is a deck that I do use year-round because it has such a great energy. I love its cheeky nature. It does such a great job of kind of like highlighting how like oblivious humans are sometimes, because like there can be this whole crazy thing going on around us, like right, all these zombies and everything, and some of the people are just like going about their business like no big deal, man, just some zombies hanging out with us. It's got a great sense of humor. I love the interpretation of the tarot represented through these sort of vintage almost like comedy style renderings. They're just hilarious. I have worked with this deck quite a bit with the Housewives Tarot and the Curious Creatures. I think I did a whole video on it as well, because I spent like a whole month with those three decks together and it was amazing. They read together beautifully. One of the things that I like to pull this deck out for outside of spooky season, because of course it's a great spooky season deck, right? All the zombies and the sort of darkness and decay. The other thing that this deck is really good for, just in terms of general readings, is that it really does kind of highlight where maybe things are being exaggerated to the extreme. So like when I'm like having a bad day or something, this is one of the decks that I will come to because it kind of like takes me out of that space and makes me look at things from a different perspective. So like, yeah, maybe I'm having a bad day and maybe this, that, or the other is going wrong, but like, it's not that bad, man. It's just not. This is my favorite Queen of Cups. Love it. It's amazing. So it does a really good job of kind of like shifting me out of that energy and reminding me that like none of this is permanent, right? This is all temporary. It will pass. We'll move on to something else. And like whatever it is that I'm feeling in the moment or whatever I'm unhappy about or having a bad day around, right? Like there's always another perspective to explore. And this deck does such a good job of that. I guess we're just gonna flip through pretty much every card on all of these decks, so we'll get a good, nice little walkthrough. I'm only gonna do tarot in this video, so we should have time because we're gonna do Oracle in a special edition of Playing with Pairs. But yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite decks. It's just got the greatest energy, and I love working with it. It never fails to deliver. Like, deep and profound messages, but also ones that are sometimes just like, hey, like it's gonna be okay, right? Things are not that bad, and whatever it is that you're going through, like chances are you're probably like making it worse than it needs to be, right? You're like exaggerating things in your own head or within your emotional state, which is, it tends to happen to me a lot. And so I love this deck for that. I love this High Priestess too. It's amazing. It's a great, great reader. I highly, highly recommend it. Like if I could only have one spooky season deck, it would probably be this one. So let's talk about another spooky season deck that I absolutely love and do work with year round. This is the Horror Tarot. I have edged mine, and it is the deck that I have shown before, and I call it my Castlevania deck because the art style of Abigail Larson reminds me of the art style that we often see in Castlevania. And something about these figures, these images, just really speak to that. Like this one, super strong Castlevania vibes there. This one just like, it just full on taps into that energy for me. And so for that reason alone, I absolutely adore this deck. But in terms of being a spooky season deck, like I think it just fits perfectly within this world. It's kind of like the vampire-y, maybe a little bit sort of video game cartoonish version of spooky season. And like, I mean that in the best possible way. Don't you love how sometimes when you say things and it kind of sounds like you're digging at the thing, but really you mean it like that's a great thing. I love that energy. Yeah, that's how I feel about this deck. My only complaint with this deck is I cannot read the titles. They are teeny tiny and in this holographic red foil thing, which I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it's completely unreadable unless you like catch it in just the right light. But this deck is very Rider-Waite-Smith, and so I absolutely do not need the titles, and that's cool. It's also a little bit Pip-ish, and I love it. I think that this is Pips or slightly Pip-ish, done really, really beautifully. I think that it works really well with this deck, and I just adore working with it. I had the Darkwood Tarot for a little while, which is also by Abigail Larson. The artwork is by Abigail Larson, and like it was fine, and I enjoyed getting to know it, but it didn't sit in the space that I wanted it to. Like I didn't make that personal connection to it that I was looking for, and I totally got that with this deck. Like this was the deck, like this is my Abigail Larson deck, right? If I had to pick one, this is the one. And I absolutely love the artwork. I think her art style is beautiful. Love the Seven of Cups, one of my favorites. Something about it. And aesthetically, this deck is just like everything. When I first got it, I was like, ooh, I hate the red borders, but they've totally become a part of the deck now for me, and I absolutely love it. Isn't it gorgeous? There is, I don't know if we've come across it yet because I haven't been paying that close of attention, but there is like a creepy clown in this deck, and I just don't even care. Look at this card. Beautiful. See, this one's a bit more pippy, but totally still a scene depicted, and it fits within the context of the deck. Here's the creepy clown. Sorry for anybody who doesn't like clowns. He doesn't bother me. I am not a fan of clowns at all, but that particular clown doesn't bother me. It's like he's the one I've made friends with, which is kind of amazing. I just think this is such a beautiful deck. I love working with it. I love reading with it. I adore this card too. Best Six of Cups. Six of Cups, yeah? Yeah, can't read it, but I know that's what it is. So yeah, this just hit where I wanted the Darkwood to hit, which I know is just totally funny because they are very different energies. That one feels a little bit young to me. This one feels a little bit more grown up for whatever reason, and I absolutely love it. Look at that card. Beautiful. So the next deck that will be living in my basket as soon as I make it a bag and it leaves my table, because honestly, this deck you might recognize from a few little videos I did, is the Necronomicon Tarot. I have edged it finally, edged it in black. It's still coming off on my hand, so I still need to like do the wipe it down thing. But this deck, like if you watched my 5-minute flip, or if you're in my membership, I did a whole like playing with this deck in my membership, which was so much fun. I paired it, I did a reading with it, it was fantastic. This deck has pretty much not left my table since I opened it. I think it's amazing. I really enjoy working with it. There is so much about this deck that aligns with the way that I read tarot. And again, this one, the Horror Tarot and the Zombie Tarot, they're kind of like up there in my top spooky season decks. Love this with the pile of books up there. Doesn't it look like a rib cage too? I love that. It's a deck that's based around like Lovecraft work, but I don't really read with it that way. I'm not a fan of Lovecraft, so I don't really tie that energy into this deck. I kind of just look at it as it's a fantastic horror deck. I think that this is maybe one of the top Inside Edition decks that I've seen so far. I have many of their decks, and I think that this one is really brilliantly done. I really like the interpretations overall in the guidebook, and as I mentioned in a couple little videos and posts and stuff now, the renaming of the majors is phenomenal in this deck, and it makes so much sense to me. I am having an absolute blast working with this deck. I'll be talking about it again in my monthly wrap up because, again, it's a deck that I'm working really closely with this month, and I've been really enjoying it. It really has surprised me because, as I mentioned, I think in the little video, or maybe it was an Instagram post, I was not thrilled to like get this deck in the mail because Inside Edition sent it to me for review, and I was like, okay, yeah, no, it's not my thing, but sure, send it, I'll take a look. And it's totally my thing. To me, this is a horror deck. So where the Horror Tarot is my Castlevania deck, this is my horror deck. This feels like stepping into a horror movie. I think I mentioned in a video, I don't do horror. I don't like horror movies. I don't want to be scared. I don't think that's fun. I don't go to haunted houses. Love that card though. That's not my jam, man, but I love this sort of energy. This is the way that I like my horror. It's amazing, I think, the way that this deck has been put together. And the guidebook's really good. Like, I was kind of surprised. There's a few entries that are a bit of a miss. In particular, the one for the lovers is a total miss for me, but that's okay. Like, I don't have to resonate with every single guidebook entry, but I think this one is, I love this card. One of my favorites in the deck. I think it's just such a beautiful deck, and I really have been enjoying working with it, and you know, it was fun to edge and everything. Okay, so the next deck is a deck that I actually have 2 copies of. This is the Raven's Prophecy Tarot, and this is the edition or copy that I have that still has the orange borders. This is the one that lives in my spooky season basket because this is the one that I do tend to use toward the latter part of the year. I actually really love the orange borders on it, but I do have a copy. I might have done a video on it where I trimmed the orange borders off and I made it just like an intuitive sort of oracle type deck, and it's really beautiful that way too. They have completely different energies. So I like having this copy as well. I actually picked this one up off the trade table at the Northwest Tarot Symposium, and it is on the old cardstock, and I adore it. It shuffles beautifully, it works beautifully, it looks beautiful. It's an amazing deck. And I think perfect for this time of year. The orange borders actually I think work really well with this particular one. Again, my trimmed copy has a totally different sort of energy to it. It's really fascinating to me how when I trim a deck, and I have 2 different versions of it where it has the borders and then a copy that doesn't have borders, and they read completely different. And that's always such a trip. I love it. This deck also I did in a Playing with Pairs a month or so ago, and I paired it with the Mabon Oracle, and it's just kind of amazing. So we'll just quickly flip through the rest of it because I think I've gone through every card in all of these so far. Might have said that already, but it's been a really long day already, and it's not over yet. So my brain is a little fried. But look at that for the 5 of coins. I mean, that's kind of pippish, but it's beautiful. It's pips, what do the kids say? Pips with feelings? I love it. So the next deck in my spooky season basket is, well, I had to put it back in my spooky season basket because I'm actually working with it pretty heavily for this month's monthly medicine, and this is the Ghost and Spirits Tarot. And this deck, okay, so the backs I don't get. They don't match. I don't know what was up with that, but whatever. I love it anyway. This is a deck that I worked with, I rehomed, and then repurchased. And I'm really glad that I did. I love Lisa Hunt's artwork, but sometimes it is so intricately detailed that it's really hard for me to kind of pick out what's going on in the scene. The guidebook that comes with this deck, the little white book that comes with this deck, is actually really wonderful because it names all the ghosts and spirits within the cards. So when you add that layer in, which I have been doing this month, it really enhances your work with the cards and the deck, I think. It's made a big difference, really diving deep into that level for me. Again, this is one that I'm working with very heavily for monthly medicine throughout October. Why do I have the extra? I have an extra art card in here. It's never come up for me in a reading, but it's in here. Usually I keep those to be able to edge them because I have not edged this deck yet, but I probably will. Anyway, it's one that I'm working with for monthly medicine, so I'll be talking about it more in depth in my end of the month review, where I talk about all the decks that I worked with throughout the month of October. This is the main one, the main tarot deck that I'm using for monthly medicine. I've been swapping some oracles in and out with it, but other than that, like, this is the main one that I've been working with all month long, so I've gotten a chance to get to know it pretty well, and I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love, again, the addition of the knowing and naming the ghosts and spirits that are in the card. It just adds a whole nother level to it. But like, as you can see, the artwork is really, really detailed. It's really beautiful. I do have several of Lisa Hunt decks. If I could get my words out today, would be fantastic. And I think they're really wonderful. This one is one that I'm really glad that I brought back into my collection. I actually brought it back in after an Oracle deck came in that I was like, ooh, I need that to pair with it. And it was amazing, and I've been working with it all month. So we'll be seeing that amazing pairing and the reason I repurchased this deck. But yeah, it's a beautiful one. Full on spooky season, ghosty vibes, right? Gorgeous. Love the artwork. Again, super, super detailed though, so sometimes it's a little bit difficult for me to tell what is entirely going on in the cards, but overall, like, I really, really love it. It's been wonderful getting to know it and actually working with it in that really in-depth way this month. Okay, so the next tarot deck in my spooky season basket is the Trionfi Della Luna Illustrated. This deck and I have edged it. This deck and I have been, I think I have all the extra cards on top. We've been through it. We've been through it. I think it might even be still in order because I got it. I did a video with my members where I was like, oh no, this is not for me. But I think it was actually more of a reflection of where I was at that time in my life. And it really didn't have anything to do with the deck. So I put it away. And this is definitely something that I've learned about, like, working with decks, having a larger collection. Like, not every deck hits me right the first time I see it, the first time I work with it. And so sometimes I just put them away. And then I got it back out when I was doing a declutter. And I was like, oh, wait. No, I really don't want to get rid of this. I do want to work with it. There's something about this deck, like, some of it kind of creeps me out, but then some of it I'm like, it's super cool and I really love it. Also, the color palette is just really, really amazing. And so I got it back out and I put it in my spooky season basket because I thought maybe if I work with it during this time of year, that maybe I might find its place in my collection. It's kind of like the zombie tarot a little bit in that it's kind of creepy and it's kind of depicting this like weird little world, but there's a sense of humor here. And I think that the first time I flipped through this deck, I was just not in a place to see it. Like this Three of Cups, this was the card that I was like, oh, nope, I'm done. I'm out, whatever. And I had like major attitude about it. But there are so many cards that I really love the depiction. Like this Five of Cups is amazing. I love this Six of Cups, this Seven. It's just like, there's so much about it that I actually really, really love. Once I kind of like got past my initial bad reaction to it. And I've looked through it many, many times. Clearly it's still in order, so I haven't actually read with it yet. I'm going to be trying some pairings with it, and hopefully that will help maybe unlock it. Sometimes I need to pair a deck before I kind of find where it wants to sit for me. And this is one that I put in my spooky season basket because I thought maybe if I work with it this time of the year, in the darker half of the year, that it would kind of sit maybe in a similar space to like where my zombie tarot sits. So like, I'm looking forward to it. I really am. I haven't done it yet. This Four of Coins cracks me up. Yeah, but lesson learned, like this is the deck. Also love this 7 of coins, and I love this 8 too. Oh, and this 9. Like, see, there's so much about this deck I really love, but this deck definitely taught me that like there's a time and a place for decks for me, and sometimes I've got multiple stars. Or the star is missing. I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes a deck, I'm just not ready for it when it hits me or when it gets here, and I just have to put it away for a while. So I'm excited to work with this one and try pairing it and see what happens. Okay, so the next deck that I want to share with you is the Steampunk Tarot. Now this is my original version, which I've had for a couple of decades now. I don't know why I've never edged this deck. It's super bowed because I have used the heck out of it. I've talked about this deck many times on my channel. It was the second deck I ever purchased. The first deck that ever felt like I could make a personal connection to. So I've talked about that before. I think Lisa and I talked about it in our video that we did on practice. Our practice video that we did on deck collections, where I talked about how like my first deck just really, it didn't hit in a personal way for me. It was a learning deck and it was great, but it just, I never had a personal connection to that deck. And in fact, I didn't even know that you could have a personal connection to a deck until I got this one. And at the time in my life when I got this deck, I was very into steampunky stuff anyway. So this deck just like hit all the right notes for me. It is very Rider-Waite-Smith. So at that time I was still trying to reconcile the way that I was taught to read, which is not Rider-Waite-Smith, with the Rider-Waite-Smith system, and I was trying to find my way between those two things. And this deck was really helpful for that because I was able to like make that personal connection with it, and then also like learn the Rider-Waite system and figure out how I was going to work with decks based on that system, using my own sort of system, the way that I was taught to read tarot. As far as being a spooky season deck, I feel like this deck, even though it's not necessarily like in the like horror, the zombies, or anything creepy like that, it does feel very dark and moody, and it kind of feels like all these characters are like dressed up for Halloween. Like if you went to a Halloween party and the theme was steampunk, this is what the people would be wearing. This is what they would look like, in my opinion. And I adore this deck. Like, I've had it for years. I adore it. It will never, ever go anywhere, and it will always have a special place in my collection. But I do think that it fits really well with this sort of seasonal energy. Again, it kind of feels like Halloween-ish, like steampunk Halloween steampunk style. Also, just like the color palettes really sit well in that sort of dark half of the year energy. I do tend to pull this deck out quite a bit in the darker half of the year. I don't think I talk about it like in terms of how I read with it, but this is often a deck that I go to when I'm needing is like something really, really deep and personal. This is often the deck that I will go to because it's the one that I've had the longest. That's still active in my collection. I do have my first deck, which was Legacy of the Divine Tarot. I do still have that deck, but it's not one that I read with anymore. I just keep it just because it was my first deck. This was the first deck that I bought and read and like worked with exclusively for many, many years. Okay, so the last tarot deck that I have to share with you today is probably the deck that I feel like is probably like the most special outside of my sentimental attachment to the Steampunk Tarot. This is obviously Madame Lydia Wilhelmina's Tarot of Monsters, the Macabre, and Autumn Scenes. It's quite the title. I just call it Madame Lydia's. And this is a deck, oh, here's the backs. I don't know if I showed the backs of the other decks. I have edged mine. This is a deck that is like super special to me. I went on a big hunt for it. I absolutely love working with it. I love reading with it. It's got such a dark, macabre energy, but it's also like beautifully rendered. So this is pretty sure digital collage, digital art, and it's done phenomenally. There's also not a happy squirrel, but a dreary squirrel. I think it says deary. Yeah, it says deary, which I think is a typo. I think it's supposed to be the dreary squirrel, but either way. I absolutely adore this deck. I kind of save it out special just for like spooky season most of the time, although I have gotten into this deck for other various readings and reasons because I do really love it. There's just something about the energy of it that just really hits in this kind of dark, spooky, macabre, place for me. It's like a bit creepy, but it's also like beautiful. And like I appreciate the beauty and the creepiness of this deck. It's just kind of got a unique energy. And I don't feel that, even though I have other decks that actually even have some of the similar artwork, and it's still, this hits in completely different way. I love that Ten of Swords. It's beautiful. And I think that it's got such a unique energy, and it's an amazing reader. But it is one that I do kind of tend to hold out special for this time of year. And I get really excited for October to roll around, because then I'm like, yes, I can get out my Madame Lydia's deck. Like once October hits, then I'm like, have full permission to use this deck all the time. Look at this Nine of Coins. I love it. Even though I have gotten into this deck, you know, in other months throughout the year, but it's just something about as soon as October hits, that is like Madame Lydia's month. And she will come out and play. And I adore working with it. And I will use it all throughout sort of the latter part of the year. So October, November, and even some into December. This is often a deck that I'll pull out for specific work or readings, or just to kind of get like a general overall vibe. When I'm kind of like, I just want to slip into this kind of dark and creepy and kind of macabre sort of energy. This is the deck that I pull out, because it has that to a T, and I think it's perfect for this time of year. And it's beautiful. I do think it is out of print right now, so sorry to end on an out of print note, but it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for if you're interested. Okay, so there you go. That is all the tarot decks that are in my spooky season basket. I do have 3 oracle decks that live in here, but we will be seeing those in the spooky season edition of Playing with Pairs. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and checking out the tarot decks in my spooky season basket. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.